Good morning. I'm glad to be here on kind of a cloudy day, because otherwise you would all be at the beach, right? Isn't that what people do in Saugatuck and Douglas? I'm particularly happy to see my friends here, Chris Byron and Tom Wilson. Chris is actually the reason I'm here. Way back, she invited me to create this presentation for the library at the, what's it called? The History Detectives. That was 2020, I think it was, 2019, something like that. Anyway, but I'm happy to be here today to present it again. It always is, I've done this several times since then, but not so often that I don't get a little rusty. So you might ask me a question and I might scratch my head and say, I think I used to know that. So today, we're going to take a virtual tour of a wooden road that went from Grand Rapids to Kalamazoo. So let's get started. First, I want to tell you a little bit about how this came to be. In 1981, I started researching the Plank Road and continued to collect information about it for a whole year. This is before the internet, so it required that I do some travel and talk to some people at different towns along the way. In '82, I published a feature article in a magazine called the Wonderland magazine. Do any of you remember that? It was a Sunday supplement tabloid. I was paid the press's top price, the top pay of $150 for a year's work. So you might wonder, why would anyone do this? Let me tell you about my other job. I was a restless stay-at-home mom in need of a project. We had moved to Grand Rapids, my husband and I, from Chicago, where we'd lived for 7 years. My parents were still living in Kalamazoo, where I'm from, and we often took the road less traveled on the country lane to visit them. From family stories, I already knew that Old 131 was one of West Michigan's oldest roads. My curiosity about the road to Kalamazoo was literally a way of staying connected to my hometown. I began my research whenever I could find time. I took the family on research trips, and we stopped at little libraries along the way and talked to local historians, including a 99-year-old woman in Wayland. We even celebrated my daughter's first birthday at a restaurant along the route. During my research, I also went to the Michigan Room of the Grand Rapids Public Library. Have any of you been there? If you haven't, it's worth a trip. There's lots of good things, not just about Grand Rapids, but about all of Michigan. So after I published this article and pocketed my $150 fee, I figured maybe I should think of other ways to turn this into a little bit of a side gig. So for a couple of years, I took seniors down the Plank Road route on school buses. It was part of the adult education in Kent County. And every time I took a group of seniors, I would find out something more about the Plank Road. And I expect that today one of you might have something to add to my knowledge. So I also edited my story for the Kalamazoo Gazette. Now, if you've ever written, you know how odd it would be to have a story which starts in Grand Rapids and goes to Kalamazoo. They needed a story that started in Kalamazoo and went to Grand Rapids, so it was kind of a flip. It was the oddest project I ever did. Eventually, my interest took me in other directions, as you've heard about, and I donated, and this is another plug for the Michigan Room. They also have the archives there. And Gordon Olson, who was the city historian, kept telling me that I needed to give them all of my information. And I said, well, I'm just too embarrassed to do that, because I had like grocery bags full of notes and just stuff all over the place. And I thought, I certainly wasn't a professional historian. And he said, don't worry about it, just bring in what you've got. So one day I was cleaning the basement and I thought, well, I don't really need this anymore. I gave it all up and went back a few years later, I think probably after Chris invited me to do this presentation, and found that they had organized it beautifully. I mean, it made me look so good. So when you're done with your projects, and I'm sure that you have some, make sure that you donate them to a good archive so they can organize it for you. So there it all sat until 2022 when Chris Byron asked me to do the presentation for the History Detectives. I will say, at that time, I needed to go back and find out what else I might be able to find. So I Googled it and found a lot more information. So let's start a virtual tour down the road. I first started the plank road from my grandmother, Shirley Goodrich Stoddard, who was a wonderful keeper of family history. All four of her grandparents lived at one time on or near the Plank Road, just north of Kalamazoo in Cooper Township. My grandmother told me that she remembered seeing Pottawatomi Indians in canoes from the road as she was going to high school down in Kalamazoo. My grandma Shirley was born in this red brick house that you see on the left, the home of her paternal grandparents, Asa and Laura Stoddard. She was born in 1892. It's a beautifully restored home just south of the Kalamazoo Nature Center on Westnedge. Her mother, Caroline Goodrich, grew up on the hilliest part of the Plank Road near Kalamazoo there. She told of watching the stagecoaches race down the hill in front of her house, which was called Goodrich Hill. She told my grandmother, on no uncertain terms, that the horses had galloped all the way from Grand Rapids, which wasn't true about. And so when I started doing this project, my grandmother was still alive, and she said, would you check on that? I can't believe that that's really true. It's 48 miles. So even a good horse can't do that. Old family stories told to us at a young age have a way of leaving us with questions, more questions maybe than answers, and perhaps lead us into doing our own research. This other house is a Plank Road era house. I thought it was the family home, but it is not, but it's still there on Goodrich Hill. Here's the route of the Plank Road and a brief overview. The road opened in 1855 and followed the current modern route of Old 131, which runs parallel to US 131. It was a full 48-mile road, starting at Division Avenue, south of Grand Rapids, and ending at Douglas Avenue, north of Kalamazoo. It was a toll road, and was pretty much defunct by 1870, so it had a fairly short life. In its heyday, the Plank Road cut through untamed wilderness, but practically overnight, little towns sprouted up along the road, like Plainwell, Martin, Bradley, and Wayland. This is a beautiful unsigned painting by an unidentified artist. I have no idea where you would ever see this painting. It's all over the internet, but there's no attribution at all. But it's a lovely painting of how plank roads looked. The first American plank road was built in Syracuse, New York in 1846, and copying a Canadian road built about 10 years earlier, which probably copied roads in Russia. Roads paved in wood were a real innovation and an improvement for sure, but think for a minute about the wear and tear on wood caused by metal wheels and metal horseshoes. It makes you wonder what they were thinking. Plank roads weren't Michigan's first highways. We need to go back many decades before to in the 19th century to the first European settlers who were trickling into the Michigan territory. At that point, our peninsula already had a network of well-worn trails used by wildlife, and the pre-settlement population of Native Americans that numbered about 15,000. So they needed to get around and had their own trails. One early settler wrote, "From the door of our log house, we could often see long lines of Indians on foot or on ponies wending their way along trails that were in places worn down to a depth of 2 feet." So what happened to these trails? Anyone want to take a guess? Where are those trails?
Covered in concrete and asphalt.
That's right. And they are under US 131, US 96, 94, 75, and you should know US 12, right? So, and you know, it was the shortest distance between 2 important points, as it was for wildlife, for Native Americans, and for us today when we want to get someplace quick. But just like cement and asphalt doesn't last, neither do plank roads. Michigan, by this time, had gained not a very good reputation. Cartographers of the period were less than impressed. They had read reports from surveys calling Michigan unsuitable for agriculture or any productive activities. They stamped the words. This is not the map I'm talking about. I can't find it, but one of the cartographers stamped "interminable swamp" across the entire mitten. So New England was looking for land, went right on by Michigan. Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois were all bona fide estates before 1818, but Michigan was still a lowly territory until 1837. It was embarrassing and frankly a bit hurtful. Granted, most transportation in the state before 1850 was by water. Commerce was limited to trade with Canada across the Great Lakes. When you live on a humongous cul-de-sac, you don't get very many visitors. No one passes through and says, "Look, honey, there's a pretty plot of land. Let's settle here." No, that happened south of here, but didn't happen in Michigan. But fortunately, all of this was about to change. 1837 was a good news, bad news year for Michigan. The good news was that Michigan had finally achieved statehood. The bad news was that the United States was plunged into a recession, the Panic of 1837. This political cartoon shows a landlord standing at the door with an eviction notice. Mother is saying, "My dear, cannot you contrive to get some food for the children? I don't care for myself." But Pa laments, "I have no money and cannot get work." In that year, the price of a bushel of wheat dropped from $1.50 to 37 cents. Banks collapsed, businesses folded, unemployment rose to 25%. The recession persisted for 7 years. Without roads and without the taxes to pay for them, our state was in deep trouble. Grand Rapids' John Ball, the one who gave land for the park and the zoo, wrote that year was a perfect blight came over Michigan. Things were even worse in the village of Grand Rapids. The city was 50 miles north of the nearest rail line. Its only reliable connection to the outside world was steamboats plying their way to Lake Michigan and having to go all the way around to get, for example, to Detroit. Getting anywhere was damn near impossible. Then along came the Good Intent Line, which ran stagecoaches from Battle Creek through Richland, Prairieville, Yankee Springs, Middleville, Whitneyville, and Cascade into Grand Rapids. Along roughly this route. But the route was torturous. Even today, in a car, it takes 2 hours. So you can imagine how long it took. The road to Grand Rapids was paved with good intent, perhaps, but not much else. One traveler compared Michigan's early roads to beds of brickyard mortar. The cartographers of the time seemed to be right. After all, 17% of the state were marshes and wetlands, and much of the rest was loose sand, as you well know over here, unless it was drifted over with snow. I bet you're wondering, why didn't Michigan just build railroads? Well, they did. Between 1830 and 1850, there were a few lines that were laid, but most railroad projects were just too expensive for a young state without a tax base. So they finally sort of gave up. State and local governments were simply too broke to take over the building of railroads or roads. So the good citizens of Michigan, though, took it into their own hands. They already knew about corduroy roads, which were simply logs that were laid side by side in low areas. But logs tended to shift, rot, or even float away during floods. The corduroy roads were a hazard to draft animals. One of my earliest memories is going with my father out to a road in Berry County where the gravel had worn down to the old corduroy logs underneath. The plank road shown in the bottom of this diagram were a big improvement. They were built with thick milled timbers, so they weren't round on top, and nailed to stringers underneath, and which raised the planks off the ground. They were easy to build in areas that had lots of available timber, like West Michigan. So it was handy and virtually free, the wood was. In the late 1840s, so many investors began jumping on the plank road bandwagon that there was a term coined called Michigan Plank Road Fever. Hardest hit by the fever was Michigan's governor, Epaphroditus. Anyway, Governor Ransom was a farmer and a circuit judge from Kalamazoo. He rode the circuit on horseback, and so he knew about roads and was not a fan. He became Michigan's 7th governor in 1848, and he pushed through an act called the Plank Road Act, which created standards for privately owned and operated toll roads, plank toll roads. It's a pretty good, considering what they had at their disposal, I think it was a pretty wise choice. The law called for good, smooth, permanent roads, 16 feet wide, with planks 3 inches thick and laid side by side on stringers. Operators were allowed to charge tolls, as long as it wasn't inside a city limit, for construction and maintenance of the road. Under Ransom's leadership, 200 plank roads were chartered, which would have created 6,000 miles of planked roads throughout the state. Major roads that were built were Detroit to Lansing, Saginaw to Flint, Battle Creek to Hastings, Kalamazoo to Three Rivers, Hillsdale to Reading, I don't know where that is. Even Little Grand Marais had a plank road up in the UP. In total, over 1,700 miles were built. The Kalamazoo Gazette took up the cause in 1850 with this editorial. Everyone knows there's a flourishing city 50 miles north of Kalamazoo, boasting splendid churches, steamboats, and enterprising businessmen. This city is located isolated from the business part of the state by the horrible roads. A plank road would obviate the difficulties of mud and mire, but pay the stockholders from 20 to 30% on their investments when the long train of loaded teams shall daily pass its toll gates. Wow, 20 to 30% return on investment. I would have invested, wouldn't you? Easy money. But to set an example to the Michigan public, Governor Ransom sank his entire fortune into the Grand Rapids to Kalamazoo Plank Road. That year, the road company was incorporated with 4 directors, including our guy Ransom. They secured rights-of-way and set about servicing the road. By October of 1851, stock shares totaling 70,000 were offered for sale. And 2 days later, a call went out for 500 workers. The undersigned is now ready to give employment on the Plank Road. It is also ready to let contracts for grading and laying the planks 12.5 miles to the north of Kalamazoo and 19 miles south from Grand Rapids, and with 1 bridge across the Kalamazoo River. This was Titus Doan, who ended up being the contractor for the road. There is a little lake right off of, in view of the Plank Road north of Bradley that's called Doan's Lake. It's very picturesque, and it was named for him. That was his property. He was an early pioneer to the Bradley Wayland area, came from a Quaker background, and his Quaker family had been loyalists or probably pacifists during the Revolutionary War and had fled to Canada and now were coming back into the United States. Work began on the Plank Road, grading Division Avenue south of Grand Rapids at the city limits at Wealthy Street and South Division. The construction of the road took about 4 years. Toll gates had to be built as well in Grand Rapids, Wayland, and Kalamazoo County, as far as I know. I have not found any more than that. The toll houses probably looked like this one, which was on Robinson Road near Reed's Lake, another toll road. Toll houses were usually built near the road with a gate in front. They were usually full-time residents for the proprietor who took the tolls. The owner would collect the toll and lift the gate, and since private roads were not allowed in the city limits of Grand Rapids, the toll gate of Grand Rapids was moved several times as the city grew. Meanwhile, stagecoach companies saw an opportunity. This photo mural was in the basement. I don't know if it was in the basement, but anyway, it was in the old Pantland Hotel in Grand Rapids for years. The caption read, "This is one of the Kalamazoo coaches, best transportation from Grand Rapids to Kalamazoo for 13 years. Inside the coaches, there were 3 bench seats, as well as cheaper seats sold on top of the coach. A stagecoach trip cost $2.50, which doesn't sound like much, but the equivalent today would be about $500. So it wasn't something you took casually. It was about 2.5 days' wages. Southbound travelers caught the stage at the Eagle Hotel in Grand Rapids on Market and Lewis, which is, I believe, sort of near Rosa Parks Circle. Some of the stuff says Lewis and Market. It really should say Lewis and Monroe, I think, but so I was a little confused by that. If you look closely, you can still make out the sign on this picture that says Kalamazoo Stage Hire. These are just some views of homes and businesses along the Plank Road south of Kalamazoo. There was the home of the founder, Louis Campaugh's brother, Antoine, had a home along near the present Antoine Street, named after him. And John Roche opened a store on South Division Avenue. This home stood at Oaks and Division, and it looks like there was a party going on that day. And it also looks like there was a planked sidewalk as well, which were quite common as well. In 1855, the planked surface was a traveler's dream. Along the route, businesses sprouted up to serve all of the travelers. 5 miles south of Grand Rapids in the northeast corner of what's now 84th Street, Charles Moore built a full-service rest stop. There, travelers could stretch their legs, grab a bite to eat, even stay the night. There was a blacksmith to, if your horse threw a shoe, and tired stage horses were switched out for a fresh team. The area was first called Shingle Corners, but today it's known as Cutlerville, which is an unincorporated area but it's not a legal entity. But it was named after the Cutlers, and here they are. The Plank Road was still under construction when the Cutler family moved from New York. So I have a feeling they probably had a sense, since they were from New York, where there already were plank roads, that having property on the Plank Road might be a good place to start a business. With 10 children, they also had a head start on populating the area. The fortunes of the Cutlers illustrate really the fortunes of people who were lucky enough or smart enough to have their farms right near the road. In 1853, John and Christina, the same couple I was talking about, lived in this rustic farmhouse on the left. A generation later, their son lived in this 3-story home that is now part of Pine Rest Hospital. And it was the first location of Pine Rest. It's still owned by them. But quite a change in fortunes. If you decide to take a drive, and I hope you will someday, don't miss, there are 3 Plank Road divergences. In other words, if you go down 131, you will miss 3 little parts of the Plank Road. They were all later bypassed because they were too curvy for fast-moving traffic. And so the rest of the road was straight. And so here you see the straight road in white and the Plank Road in blue. Just past 84th Street on Division, there's a fork. And if you take the left fork, you will be following the old Plank Road. And it joins up about a half a mile beyond. I took this picture of the farmhouse, the Flannery farmhouse. It's a centennial farm that was built in 1857, so right at the beginning of the Plank Road, still owned by the same family, at least, I don't know, could have sold yesterday, but I still think the house is still there. Those trees are now so big that you can hardly see the house anymore, so that's why I'm showing you my old picture. When you return to the Plank Road route, at South Division again, just probably a half a mile away, is this 20-room mansion. If you go up 131, the super highway, you used to be able to see this from the road, and it looked like a ramshackle old haunted house, and that's exactly what it was when a lot of us in here were probably young adults or even teenagers. It was run as a venue for a long time. It was rather controversial. But the house was originally built as something like 10 bedrooms by James Milford Lane for his wife and 14 children as a summer home. His winter home, his permanent residence, was on Lake Drive where Mangiano's, the former Gibson's, is. So it's a huge, and before that, I believe it was a monastery, so it's a huge house. He had a lot of money and wanted to get out of the flies and the heat of the summer, and would take his kids down, take his family down the Plank Road. So one of Lane's daughter later inherited the property and ran it as a stagecoach stop and a hotel. But in the 70s and 80s, as I told you, a colorful gentleman named James Westra turned it into a haunted house. His stories are as colorful as he was. Westra claimed that the presidential candidate, Chester Arthur and Louisa May Alcott, were both hotel guests there, which is believable. But he also told me that Jesse James stayed there under an alias, and that a body is buried in the basement. The house was sold to the Glasscott family in 2004, and they spent a lot of time and money on renovations, and today it's really quite lovely. You know, we often think that everything that's historic is sort of deteriorating. But my experience with the Plank Road is, yeah, there are some things that have disappeared since I first saw them in 1982 or 81, but there are also a lot of attention to some of those old buildings, and people seem to be recognizing their value and putting some time and effort into keeping them safe from deterioration. South of the Lane Place, the Plank Road crossed, and the road today crosses a marsh when it enters Allegan County. It's a good reminder of why Michigan really needed hard surface roads. The second scenic divergence from the highway is at 137th Street, just north of Wayland. The Plank Road took two 90-degree turns, you can see here in blue, in order to cross the Little Rabbit River at a better angle. But again, it was not safe for high-speed automobile travel. So they added a 2-lane S-curve to bypass this, and old-timers, for some reason, called it the May West curve. The houses in this little divergence are all quite old and interesting and have been preserved because they are now, kind of out of the way. Ahead is Wayland, which was first called Chambers Corners after the first white settlers, Nelson and Emily Chambers. Nelson was a businessman from Ypsilanti who fell into financial ruin after the 1837 panic. He and his wife sold everything to buy a farm that they had never seen and knew nothing about in Allegan County. And they weren't even farmers. Their farm is now downtown Wayland, but back then it was 5 miles from the nearest white neighbors. With a bit of humor, they began calling their property Rattlesnake Farm. Nearby, there were quite a number of Indian settlements and encampments of Pottawatomi Indians, ancestors of the modern Gun Lake tribe. Nelson logged the land over, a process that would probably take a year per acre, and shaved shingles to sell in nearby cities. On one sales trip, he delivered, he was delayed coming home when his oxen fell ill. Poor Emily and the children were so hungry that they dug up the seed potatoes to eat. Another time, Nelson went off with the wagon to buy a pig, and when he hadn't returned about midnight, Emily was worried, especially since she heard wolves howling in the distance. So she lit a torch and ran 3 miles in the direction of the wolf howling, and found Nelson crouched in the back of a wagon with only a small hatchet to defend himself and the pig from the circling wolves. The sight of Emily's torch scattered the wolves, but the pack followed them all the way back to their front door. I think I would have liked to get to know them. When the Plank Road came right to their front door, Nelson opened the Wayland House, which was a hotel and restaurant and a stagecoach stop. Nelson and Emily are buried under this beautiful marker about just a few feet from the original Plank Road, and that road really changed their fortunes. The Wayland House is long gone, but you can still see a Plank Road toll house that has been moved a block off of the main street, probably because it would have impinged on a 2-lane concrete road, so they moved it up just a block or so. In 1982, it wasn't in very good shape. When I went back before my library presentation, I was very pleased to see that someone was taking care of it. Another beautiful landmark is a few miles south in Bradley. This is called the Halfway House because it stands at the halfway point between Kalamazoo and Grand Rapids. It is a former hotel and another stage stop, and it looks quite welcoming, I think. Meals served by the proprietor, who was named Mary Jane Seaver, were legend. Her customers said that her table groaned with the good things she served. One of her specialties was squirrel pie. This area was also dotted with wigwams made out of birch and shaped like domes by Pottawatomi families. And just a mile south, we see this row of stately maples that sort of lead you right into the little town of Martin. They may be as old as the Plank Road. Martin was known for its large and numerous trees. One day, a young boy named Charles Garfield was traveling by stagecoach to Grand Rapids with his father. They were thinking about moving to Grand Rapids. They had been living in Wisconsin and trying to grow fruit there without a whole lot of luck, and heard that maybe this side of the lake might be better. The driver stopped for a rest under a huge walnut tree that Charles said was 33 feet around and 100 feet to the first limb. Young Charles's father pointed up to the tree and said, "Take your hat off, Charlie, to this noble tree." Charles Garfield later owned a farm in southeast Grand Rapids, which is now Garfield Park, and he was one of Michigan's first conservationists. And he often told this story. The tree in this picture, however, is it's a giant sycamore tree in Adrian, which is only 23 feet around. In downtown Martin, an early resident wanting to photograph his new horse unwittingly took the only known picture that shows actual Plank Road planks on the Grand Rapids to Kalamazoo Plank Road. This stately Monteith house south of Martin was the third house built in Allegan County and is still in beautiful condition. When travelers saw this house as they were entering north of Plainwell, they were shocked to see it was made of brick. It was the only brick house for many, many years in West Michigan, and the first. And by 1855, it was almost 20 years old. It had been built by Calvin White in 1838 and was a lot more comfortable than the hollow tree that he'd lived in prior years. White's home is probably the oldest surviving structure of the entire Plank Road. He was remembered as a friendly host who never turned a stranger away from his door. In 1847, this is before the Plank Road, James Fenimore Cooper stayed there. And after taking a trip down the Kalamazoo River all the way to Saugatuck and Douglas, he began writing openings at this home. It was the story of a beekeeper and his adventures in the Michigan wilderness and the Pottawatomi Indians of the area. White's home is remembered fondly also as the Red Brick Inn. Have any of you ever been there? It really was quite lovely. It was a popular restaurant for a long, long time, and when I was taking my family on one of my research trips, we celebrated our daughter's first birthday in 1982 there. The house is empty now and for sale, but in very good shape. There's a new roof, and I think they redid some of the chimneys or restored some of the chimneys, and it can be yours for $325,000. I can see someone getting out their cell phone right now. Cooper's book, Oak Openings, described the unpeopled forest of Michigan and the small winding reach of placid water, which is the elbow of the Kalamazoo, a beautiful little river. That river's a few miles south of the inn, of the Red Brick Inn, in the beautiful little village of Plainwell. This fisherman caught a 100-pound sturgeon at the bridge in Plainwell. We hope someday to see more of them. They are a protected species today. Back in the day, Plainwell was known as the Junction because there were often 7 stagecoaches parked in at the junction there, because there was another road that went to Allegan. Don't know whether it was planked, though. I've never seen that there was a plank road there. Decades later, one traveler compared it to this area as a beehive because there were so many Union recruits going south to join the fight. Several beautiful Plank Road era homes are just within a block of that area too. It's a lovely little town. A mile south of Plainwell, travelers had to stop and pay a toll at the Kalamazoo County line. Martha Gilman lived there with her parents, who were the gatekeepers, and she wrote about her experiences there. One story she told is that one time some fellows were coming down from Kalamazoo all dressed up for some fun. They met another group going north. They all wore tall stovepipe hats and their Sunday clothes. When the two coaches met, nobody would get off the road. There was a big fight. Both coaches rolled off the road. Fortunately, only the hats were crushed. In the end, everybody went back in the direction where they came. There's a bronze plaque in front of this house today, naming it as a Plank Road toll house. Mrs. Gilman also remembers watching circus elephants going north from Kalamazoo to Grand Rapids. Her parents' job was to collect a penny per horse per mile, or a half a penny per 20 sheep or swine, or 2 cents for 20 head of cattle. I don't know what you had to pay for elephants. Approaching Kalamazoo, travelers had to go through Cooper, which is where my family comes from. It was named either after James Fenimore Cooper or his daughter, who had married a local judge. 16 of my ancestors from 4 generations, including both my parents, have grave markers in the beautiful little Cooper Cemetery along the Plank Road. This congregational church has been on the site since 1856. Cooper's little corner IGA store at D Avenue and the Plank Road is of that vintage era and still in operation. It was the first owner became a local hero when he snagged the contract to be the local post office. Mail delivery was a very big incentive for road building as well as just travel. Stagecoaches sometimes set off without passengers just to deliver the mail. As we enter the Kalamazoo Valley, the Plank Road generally follows Douglas Avenue. But if you fork off to the right, you will enter the third divergence, which is a fork called Old Douglas. In this topographical map, you can see how it plunges down into the Kalamazoo Valley. It doesn't really show on this picture very, very well what a steep hill it is. This was called Goodrich Hill after my great-great-grandparents. Their house is no longer there. It was Deborah Skinner and Thomas Goodrich. Deborah arrived in Michigan with her brothers before Michigan was a state, which entitles me to claim being from a Michigan pioneer family. I have a certificate to prove it. Even today, the steepest part of the road, of the entire Plank Road, is just a beautiful, picturesque tunnel of trees. And this house, which I for years thought was the Goodrich house, was not, but it is a Plank Road era house, and it's just lovely and overlooks the road. The final leg of this virtual journey into Kalamazoo takes us along North Avenue to Westnedge and south to Main Street, ending at the Kalamazoo House, which was a hotel. Here's a picture of people getting on and off the stagecoach. Apparently, stagecoach drivers blew a tin whistle to announce that they were coming, so people could get ready, and they sometimes lashed the horses into a gallop, or maybe the horses were just glad to be at the end of the day. Maybe they could smell the oats or something. This bit of showmanship was part of the reason that my grandmother, Caroline Goodrich, believed that the horses had galloped all the way from Kalamazoo. I was able to tell my grandmother that this was definitely not true. This particular picture is a Kalamazoo stage arriving in Niles. So what happened to the plank road? Well, the plank road age did not end gracefully. The planks wore down, they warped and rotted. Some disappeared into the mud, or maybe got turned into fence posts. The timbers, which were supposed to last forever, needed to be replaced every 3 to 4 years. So there was just constant road maintenance, which we still know today, right? Thicker replacement, you know, you have a worn out plank and then you got a new plank like this, created such a bone-jarring ride and a terrible noise that people said they could hear stages and coaches coming from a mile away. There were sights of disabled wagons and broken wheels became common. Angry travelers just got tired of paying tolls and would sneak around the back of the toll, called shunpiking. Of course, this just led to reduced revenues and further neglect. All the Planks Road faced the same fate, but one unique burden of the Grand Rapids Road was the trade in gypsum. Gypsum was mined west of the river and used by farmers to condition the soil south of Grand Rapids. And my great-uncle Lucian, in his diary, wrote about going up to the rapids to get a load of gypsum. These super heavy loads certainly didn't help the plank road, and maybe it was the elephants. During the waning years of the road, Mark Twain traveled to Grand Rapids on a speaking tour, and when a reporter asked how his trip had gone, he said, "Well, the road would not have been bad if some scoundrel had not now and then dropped a plank across it." His speech was appropriately called "Roughing It." The fate of the road was sealed for the Grand Rapids Plank Road when news came that the Grand Rapids to Indiana Railroad would parallel the road just a few feet from the road in many spots. It reached Grand Rapids in 1870. Also, the availability of gravel, and my great-great-grandfather Stoddard had a gravel pit right near the road, so I would imagine that that some of his wealth came from selling gravel to the road. So eventually it became a gravel road. Despite the promises of 20 to 30% investment, plank roads were a very, very poor investment for shareholders. Governor Ransom, who was the hero of the plank road era, lost his fortune, his entire fortune, and his farm, and had to take a federal job in Kansas, where he died just 2 years later at age 61. So of the 200 plank roads that were chartered in Michigan, fewer than 70 were ever built. But in the end, there were more winners than losers. Half a dozen villages along the way owe their very existence to the plank road. Families like mine, the Stoddards and the Goodrich and the Chambers and the Cutlers, prospered because they bought property and ran businesses along the road. But hands down, the biggest winner was Grand Rapids. In 1840, Kalamazoo was larger than Grand Rapids. It had a railroad. It was between Detroit and Chicago. By the 1870s, when the rail line first arrived in Grand Rapids was twice as big as Kalamazoo. And Grand Rapids became the second largest city in Michigan, a distinction it still holds today. In 18 years, the town that had once been called 100 miles from nowhere had grown 15-fold. And where did all those planks go? So I bet you're wondering. When I published my article in the Grand Rapids Press, I immediately got a call from these two gentlemen, because I think I had said something like, well, the planks are gone and something like that. And so I started getting calls. This guy said, oh no, I got 2 in my barn. So the press sent a photographer down, and I don't know, it doesn't really look like they were in the barn. It looks like they were buried in the backyard. But anyway, I hope someone is still taking care of them. And on that second diversion in Wayland, there is a home that is built of Plank Road planks. And the owner invited me in back in 1982 to see the mantle on the fireplace, which is a Plank Road plank. Here in the 1920s, road workers on South Division Avenue were unearthed planks when they were laying sewer. And here's a picture, a fairly new picture of road construction in Washington State digging up old planks. So they're still there. And now, in closing, I'm going to read you some really inspiring and uplifting poetry to end my presentation. I bet you didn't see that coming. Besides being a farmer with a gravel pit, my great-great-grandfather, Asa Harding Stoddard, is remembered to this day as the farmer poet of Kalamazoo. When he arrived in Cooper Township in the 1860s, the Plank Road was already in very rough shape, and he was not a fan. More than any other family story, this poem inspired me to do some research and to bring me here to you today. I think that's what poetry is supposed to do, is to inspire you. His poem is called Riding the Plank, and it goes like this. Did you ever, friend or stranger, let me ask you, free and frank, brave the peril, dare the danger of a journey on the plank? Ever see the wild commotion, hear the clatter, din, and clank? Feel the quick electric motion caused by riding on the plank? Wagons creaking, groaning, crashing, wrecks bestrewing either bank, jarring, jolting, jamming, dashing. This is riding on the plank. Hats and bonnets strangely rocking, leave no space between them blank. Kisses stolen. Oh, what shocking things do happen on the plank. Fathers swearing, children squalling, angry mothers try to spank. Seats upset and they go sprawling in a wagon on the plank. Ye with torpid liver sickened, cold and languid, lean and lank. This will cure without a question. Take one ride upon the plank. Thanks for your attention today.